He wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to notice him. But the moment Ethan sat down beside Claire, just another face in a crowded office floor, something shifted in the air between them, quiet and irreversible. He was hiding the biggest secret of the building. She was the one person he never expected to make him want to confess it. What happens next, you won't see coming. Let me introduce you to our new app, Allure TV. It's super simple to get started. You log in with Google or your email. In a few seconds you're in. This here is the home screen. Look how amazing it is. We feature dozens of intense, uncensored romance stories, organized by genre. We have mafia, billionaire, forbidden love, and contract romance themes. We have absolutely everything you could ever want. And the best part, no ads and no interruptions. Now look at this. Click here on the audio and start listening right away. You can even choose your preferred language. There's Portuguese, English, German, French. If you prefer to read, just click here on the ebook and that's it. The whole story appears for you to read at your own pace. And you can even interact. You are welcome to rate the story with stars and leave a comment. You can also add your favorite stories to a playlist and access them whenever you like. Do you like what you see? Go ahead and log in now. It is simple and free. You can find the link in the first pinned comment. The badge said Ethan Cole. The man wearing it was something else entirely. He walked into the logistics floor of Mercer Group's Chicago headquarters on a Tuesday morning with a paper cup of coffee, a worn canvas bag over one shoulder, and the kind of unhurried confidence that didn't belong in a temporary employee. Nobody noticed. That was the point. Ethan had spent 3 days preparing for this, the plain grey hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the practiced way of blending into a crowd. He was the CEO of this company. He had built half of what existed on this floor, and not a single person here had any idea. He found his assigned desk in the middle of the open-plan office, between a guy with headphones who never looked up and a woman who was already working when he arrived. She didn't greet him, didn't smile the polished, slightly nervous smile people usually gave him. She glanced up once, just long enough to register that someone had sat down, gave a single nod, and went back to her screen. That was it. Ethan set down his coffee and opened his laptop, but his eyes stayed on her a second longer than they should have. She had dark hair pulled back in a way that looked accidental rather than styled. A yellow legal pad full of handwritten notes sat beside her keyboard. She was mouthing something quietly as she read. Not words, just rhythm, like someone working through a problem with their whole body. He looked away, opened a spreadsheet, reminded himself why he was here. There had been a financial discrepancy in the logistics division, subtle enough that 3 internal audits had missed it, significant enough that Ethan's CFO had flagged it with a single sentence in an email. Someone inside knows what they're doing. Ethan trusted 2 people with the details of this investigation. He hadn't told his assistant. He hadn't told his driver. He had come here himself because the only way to find a careful lie was to get close enough to feel it. He spent the first hour observing. The floor had 32 people. Most arrived between 8:15 and 8:40. The woman next to him had been here before 8. There was a coffee ring on her desk that suggested she'd been here even earlier, working through something before the rest of the team arrived. Around 10, she pushed back from her chair and walked to the printer across the room. The machine jammed. She didn't sigh, didn't kick it, didn't flag someone else down. She crouched in front of the panel, opened the side door, removed the crumpled paper with 2 fingers, and had it running again in under a minute. The man waiting behind her looked mildly stunned. She walked back to her desk without comment. Ethan found himself watching the way she moved, not with the self-consciousness of someone who knew she was being watched, but with the easy focus of someone who simply had things to do and intended to do them. There was something in that, something he couldn't immediately name, that pulled at a place in his chest he usually kept very still. He needed to focus. He had a financial ghost to find. But when the woman next to him suddenly muttered, to herself clearly, not to him, "That can't be right," and leaned so close to her screen that her nose was nearly touching it, Ethan caught the faint scent of her shampoo. Something warm, understated. Nothing like the carefully chosen fragrances he was surrounded by in boardrooms. He looked at his own screen. Then, before he could think better of it, he said, System glitch? She turned, looked at him with those steady, unimpressed eyes. Probably, she said, or someone entered the wrong code 3 weeks ago and nobody caught it until now. She went back to work. Ethan went back to his screen, but the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, in something that wasn't quite a smile yet. Not yet. By the 3rd day, Ethan had stopped pretending he wasn't paying attention to her. He told himself it was professional instinct, the same quiet observation he applied to every room he walked into. But somewhere between watching her arrive 20 minutes early for the 2nd time and noticing the way she always refilled her coffee before sitting down, never after, he understood that what he was doing had very little to do with the investigation. Her name was Claire. He'd learned that from a team email, not from her. She hadn't volunteered it, and something about that felt entirely consistent with everything else he'd observed. She didn't perform, didn't adjust her posture when the floor manager walked by, didn't laugh louder when someone senior was within earshot. She existed in the room the same way whether anyone was watching or not. That was rare, rarer than people understood. On Wednesday morning, he created his first excuse. "Hey, sorry to bother you." He turned slightly in his chair. "This inventory tracking system, is it always this slow, or am I doing something wrong?" Claire glanced over without moving her chair. Her eyes went to his screen, scanning it with the quick efficiency of someone who'd looked at that interface 1,000 times. "You're in the wrong module," she said. "That's the archive view. Go up 2 levels. "Right," he navigated. "Like this." She leaned over slightly, just enough. The warmth of her presence registered before anything else, close, unhurried, smelling faintly of coffee and something softer underneath, something that had no business being distracting in a fluorescent-lit office at 9 in the morning. "There," she said, pointing at the screen. "See that tab? That's where live data loads." "Got it. Thank you." She nodded and returned to her own screen. No lingering. No curiosity about who he was or why he didn't already know the system. She helped people the way she fixed printers, cleanly, without making it a moment. Ethan spent the next hour actually working or trying to. The discrepancy he was tracking had a pattern, small transfers, irregular intervals, always attached to legitimate shipment records. Whoever was doing this was patient, methodical. He almost admired it, in the cold way he sometimes admired things that were built to outlast detection. But his eyes kept drifting. Claire was on a call by 11, and she handled it with the same unhurried directness she applied to everything. There was a supplier issue, a delayed shipment that had apparently been misrouted through a third-party warehouse. She didn't escalate, didn't panic, didn't send it up the chain. She pulled up a secondary contact, made 2 calls, and had a rerouting confirmation within 40 minutes. The floor manager walked by, glanced at her screen and said, "Nice work on the Dayton thing." "It wasn't complicated," Claire said simply. The manager moved on. Claire went back to typing. Ethan watched that small exchange with an attention that surprised even him. Not the competence, he'd expected that or something like it. What caught him was the absence of performance around it. She hadn't looked up to see if anyone else had heard the compliment, hadn't let it change the rhythm of what she was doing. He'd spent his entire career surrounded by people who needed to be seen succeeding. It was so constant, he'd stopped noticing it. Until now, when its absence sat beside him in a grey office chair and made the whole room feel different. At lunch, she passed his desk on her way to the elevator with her bag over one shoulder. She paused, just briefly. "The system glitches around 2 o'clock most days," she said. "Autosave kicks in. Don't lose anything important." Then she was gone. Ethan sat with that for a moment. She hadn't asked if he wanted to grab lunch, hadn't offered more conversation than was useful. She just noticed something and told him, because it was practical, because that was apparently who she was. He looked at his screen, then at the elevator doors already closed. Something about the simplicity of that gesture settled in his chest like a stone dropping into still water, quiet, but sending ripples in every direction. He wasn't sure yet what to do with that. It started without either of them deciding it would. Thursday, The cafeteria was loud in the way office cafeterias always are, chairs scraping, microwave beeping, someone's phone playing a video at full volume in the corner. Ethan had taken a tray to a table near the window, mostly because it was the least crowded spot. He was halfway through something that claimed to be pasta when Claire appeared with her own tray, scanned the room with the practical eyes of someone just looking for a seat, and landed on the empty chair across from him. "This okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Go ahead." That was it. No preamble, no performance. She sat down, opened a container of leftover something that smelled considerably better than his pasta, and they ate in silence for almost 2 minutes, the kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable so much as honest. Then she said, without looking up, "You're not from logistics, are you?" It wasn't a question. Not quite. Ethan kept his expression easy. "What makes you say that?" "You navigate the system like someone who's used something better." She stabbed a piece of roasted sweet potato. "And you ask questions you already know the answers to." He looked at her. She looked back, and calm, direct, not accusatory, just observant. "I transferred from another division," he said. It was the cover story. Clean, rehearsed, boring enough to be believable. She considered this for exactly 1 second. "Okay," she said, and went back to eating. No follow-up. No probing. She accepted it and moved on, and somehow that made it worse. The ease with which she gave him the benefit of the doubt, the complete absence of suspicion. He'd been lied to enough in his life to know that trust wasn't naivety. In Claire's case, it looked more like a conscious choice, like she'd decided somewhere along the way that people deserved a fair read until they proved otherwise. He didn't deserve it, but he took it. The conversation that followed began with work, a bottleneck in the afternoon shipping reports, and ended somewhere entirely different. She mentioned her father offhand, something about him working building security for 20 years, and the way she said it carried a quiet pride that had nothing to do with status. He used to say that the most important people in any building were the ones nobody remembered to thank, she said. The night cleaners, the guys at the loading dock, the security guard who holds the elevator for you without being asked. "Did you believe him?" Ethan asked. "I watched him work for 20 years, she said simply. "I didn't need to believe him. I just paid attention." Something about that landed with more weight than she probably intended. Ethan thought about his own father. Boardrooms, firm handshakes, lessons about leverage and positioning. Good lessons, useful ones, but nothing like that. "What about you?" she asked. "What did you learn growing up that you actually kept?" The question was so direct that it bypassed every prepared version of himself. He thought for a moment, genuinely thought, which wasn't something he did often in conversation anymore. "That people tell you who they are in the small moments," he said finally. "Not the big ones." Claire nodded slowly, like she was turning it over. "I think that's right," she said. "The big moments are rehearsed. Nobody rehearses the small ones." They sat with that for a second. Outside the window, Chicago moved at its usual pace, a delivery truck idling at a red light, 2 women sharing an umbrella against the late October wind, a cyclist threading between taxis with terrifying confidence. Ethan realized he'd been at this table for 40 minutes. He was supposed to have been back at his desk 20 minutes ago. He didn't move. Neither did she. "Same time tomorrow?" he said, and immediately wasn't sure why he'd said it out loud. Claire picked up her tray and stood. There was the smallest pause and barely a breath before she answered. "I'm usually here by 12:15, she said. She walked away without looking back, but she didn't say no. It was a Friday night when the floor emptied, and neither of them left. Not by design, or at least that's what Ethan told himself, when he noticed at 6:15 that most of the team had gone, and Claire was still at her desk, frowning at her screen with the focused intensity of someone who had found something wrong and refused to leave until it was right. He had his own reasons to stay. The pattern he'd been tracking in the financial records had shifted slightly that afternoon, a new thread, thin but real, and he wasn't ready to let it go cold overnight. So they stayed, separately, silently, on opposite sides of the same quiet. By 7, the cleaning crew had come and gone. The overhead lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting, lower, warmer. The kind of light that made an office feel less like a workplace and more like something else entirely. Ethan was so deep in his own screen that he almost didn't hear her. "Hey," Claire's voice cut through the silence. "Do you know anything about corrupted Excel files?" He looked up. She was turned toward him, one knee pulled up onto her chair, legal pad in her lap. The frustration on her face was real and slightly endearing, the look of someone who was very good at most things and deeply annoyed by the exceptions. "Depends on how corrupted," he said. "I had a full reconciliation report. 3 weeks of data." She turned her screen toward him. "Now it's this." The file was throwing an error he recognized, a formula chain collapse, usually triggered by a broken external reference, fixable but tedious. "Pull your chair over," he said. She did. The wheels of her chair made a soft sound against the floor as she rolled to his side of the desk, close enough that their shoulders were almost level. He could feel the warmth of her beside him before he could properly register it, that specific quiet heat of another person near you in a still room. He reached across and took the keyboard, pulled up the back-end formula view. "Here," he said, pointing. "Your reference broke when someone renamed a source tab. See this chain? It's all pulling from a file that no longer exists by that name." "Are you serious?" It wasn't a question. It was the sound of someone doing the math on how long this had been broken. "It's fixable. Give me a minute." He worked through it, methodically, one broken link at a time. Claire watched, and he was aware of her watching, aware of the way she leaned slightly forward to follow what he was doing, close enough that once, when he shifted to type, his arm brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. "How do you know this?" she asked quietly. "I've broken enough systems to know how to put them back together," he said. She laughed, unexpected, genuine, a soft sound in the dim office that did something immediate to the air between them. He turned to look at her and found her closer than he'd registered, her face open and unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before, lit by the pale glow of the screen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the HVAC system filled the silence. Somewhere far below, the city moved on without them. Ethan was the one who looked away first, back to the screen. He hit the final correction and the file rebuilt itself, rows of clean data cascading back into place like something exhaling. "There," he said. Claire looked at the screen, then at him. Her expression had shifted into something he couldn't quite read. Not gratitude exactly, not quite suspicion either. Something more careful than both. "Thank you," she said, quietly, like the word meant more than its surface. "Don't lose it again," he said. "I didn't lose it the first time," she replied, and rolled her chair back to her side of the desk. But she was smiling when she did it. And Ethan sat in the half-dark long after she'd gone, his hand resting exactly where hers had been. It was the car that started it, not the car itself. A black Escalade parked half a block from the building entrance, engine running. The kind of vehicle that belonged to someone who didn't drive themselves anywhere. Claire had noticed it twice before without thinking much of it. Chicago had no shortage of expensive cars and the people who needed them. But on Monday morning, when she walked out of the building at lunch and watched Ethan pause at the curb, just for a second, barely a breath, before deliberately turning in the opposite direction, something small and quiet clicked in the back of her mind. She didn't say anything. She filed it away the way she filed most things, carefully, without urgency, in a place she could return to later. The second crack appeared, Tuesday afternoon. Ethan's phone rang while they were both at their desks, and he silenced it fast, faster than someone silences a spam call, with the specific tension of someone silencing something they don't want heard. But before the screen went dark, Claire caught a single word on the display. Not a name, a title, board. She looked back at her screen immediately. Her pulse did something she didn't give it permission to do. A logistics temp didn't get calls from boards. People who transferred from other divisions didn't navigate financial systems with the quiet precision of someone who had built them. And people didn't look at you the way Ethan looked at her, with that particular attention, that careful, layered focus, unless they were either deeply interested in who you were or deeply careful about who they were. She was starting to think it might be both. By Wednesday, She had 3 inconsistencies she couldn't explain away, and one she couldn't stop thinking about. During a team meeting she'd attended purely by accident, a scheduling overlap, wrong conference room, she'd heard the floor manager mention a corporate review initiative. The phrase he'd used was careful and deliberate, eyes from above. He hadn't elaborated. Nobody had asked him to. Claire had sat very still and thought about a man who arrived early, asked questions he already knew the answers to, and fixed a corrupted Excel file in 4 minutes like it was reflex. She didn't confront him. That wasn't how she operated. But the lunches changed. Not dramatically. She didn't cancel, didn't manufacture excuses. She was simply slightly elsewhere. She answered his questions, but stopped asking her own. The stories she'd been sharing, the small personal ones, the ones about her father and growing up in a building where she knew every service corridor by heart, those stopped coming. She kept the door open just enough to be civil and drew a quiet line just inside it. Ethan noticed. She knew he noticed because he got careful in the way people get careful when they realize something has shifted and don't yet know why. On Thursday, he set a coffee on her desk without being asked. She looked at it, then at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I was getting one anyway," he said. "Okay." She picked it up. "Thank you." There was a pause. The kind that had started happening between them lately, charged in a way their early silences never were. "Did I do something?" he asked, quietly. No deflection in it, no performance, just a direct question from someone who wanted an honest answer. Claire looked at him for a moment. The overhead light caught the angles of his face, and she thought, not for the first time, that he was extraordinarily difficult to read when he wanted to be, and completely transparent when he didn't. Right now, he was both at once. Worried and guarded and something else underneath that she was trying very hard not to name. "No," she said finally. Which was true. He hadn't done anything. Yet. She turned back to her screen. He stayed where he was for 1 more second. She could feel it, that particular weight of someone deciding whether to push further. And then he sat down. He didn't push. But that evening, alone at her desk after he'd left, Claire opened a new browser tab and typed a single name, Ethan Cole. The results that came back were nothing. A handful of LinkedIn profiles, none of them matching. A college student in Ohio, a retired accountant in Florida. She sat with that absence for a long time. Then she closed the tab and stared at the wall, because the thing that scared her most wasn't that she might be right. It was how much she hoped she was wrong. It happened on a Wednesday, in a hallway, in front of everyone and no one. Claire was walking back from the printer with a folder tucked under her arm when she heard it, a voice from the far end of the corridor, loud with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who'd never had to be careful about being overheard. "Mercer. Hey, Ethan Mercer. I thought that was you." She stopped walking before she understood why. The man who had spoken was older, mid-50s, the kind of person whose suit announced itself before he did. He was striding toward Ethan with an extended hand and the wide smile of someone who ran into old colleagues at charity galas and felt entirely at home doing it. Ethan shook his hand. His expression was controlled, professionally, perfectly controlled. But Claire was close enough to see the single second before the control settled in. And in that second, she saw everything. "What are you doing down here?" the man was saying, laughing slightly. "Slumming it?" "Just reviewing some operations," Ethan said smoothly. "Good to see you, Richard." Claire didn't hear the rest. She was already moving, not running, not rushing, just walking with the steady, deliberate pace of someone who needed to be somewhere else and intended to get there. She made it back to her desk, set the folder down with hands that were almost steady, and sat. Around her the floor continued its usual rhythm. Keyboards, phones, the distant sound of someone in the break room arguing with the coffee machine. Normal. Ordinary. Completely indifferent to the fact that something had just rearranged itself permanently inside her chest. She didn't Google Ethan Mercer. She didn't need to. 2 desks away, a colleague had a business article pulled up on her screen. She'd seen it earlier without registering it, the way you see things before they're relevant. Now the headline assembled itself in Claire's memory with horrible clarity. A profile piece, a photograph, a name beneath it. Ethan Mercer, CEO, Mercer Group. The same jaw, the same eyes, the same hands that had fixed her Excel file in the dark on a Friday night while she sat close enough to feel his warmth. She picked up her bag. She didn't slam anything, didn't make a sound that would cause anyone to look up. She stood, collected her things with the quiet efficiency she applied to everything, and walked to the elevator. Her shoulders were straight, her face was composed. The floor manager glanced at her as she passed, and she gave him a small nod. Professional, neutral, the nod of someone leaving for a meeting, not someone whose entire understanding of the past 3 weeks had just collapsed. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. They closed. And in the 4 seconds it took to descend 1 floor, Claire pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and stood very still, breathing through something that had no name yet. Not quite anger, not quite grief, not quite the specific devastation of realizing that someone you'd started to trust had been performing the entire time. All of it. The questions he already knew the answers to. The lunches. The coffee he'd set on her desk without being asked. The Friday night in the dim office, shoulders almost touching, his arm brushing hers. She had felt something real in all of it, had let herself feel it, quietly, carefully, in the private place she kept things that mattered. And he had been lying to her face every single day. Ethan appeared in the lobby 40 seconds later. She knew because she heard the elevator behind her. She was already near the door, bag over her shoulder, the cold October air waiting on the other side of the glass. Claire. His voice was low, careful, stripped of every layer she'd heard in it before. She stopped, didn't turn around. "I can explain." "I know you can," she said quietly. Then she pushed through the door and walked into the grey afternoon, head up, spine straight, each step deliberate and even. She didn't look back. Not once. And it was that, the terrible dignity of it, the way she left without giving him the explosion he'd earned, that hit Ethan somewhere deeper than anything else could have. He stood in the lobby alone and understood, with the cold clarity of a man who had never once miscalculated anything in his professional life, that he had just made the worst mistake of his. He tried 3 times before he stopped trying the easy way. The first was a message, carefully worded, not too long, not too formal, sent through the internal company system because he didn't have her personal number, and asking for it now felt like one violation layered on top of another. She read it. He could see the timestamp change. She didn't respond. The second was a phone call to the main floor line, routed to her desk. She picked up, heard his voice in the first syllable and said, "I'm not available right now," with the polite neutrality of someone speaking to a stranger. Then she hung up. Not hard, just cleanly, the way you close a door that you have every right to close. The third attempt was worse because it involved his assistant, and the moment the words left his mouth, "I need Claire's schedule for tomorrow," he heard how it sounded and cancelled the request before it was completed. He sat at his actual desk, in his actual office on the 42nd floor, and looked out at the city he'd spent 15 years building a career above, and felt the specific smallness of a man who had run out of leverage. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't sure he knew how to exist inside it. The investigation had concluded by then, the discrepancy traced, the responsible party identified, the matter handed to legal. Everything Ethan had come to the logistics floor to do was done. He could have closed that chapter cleanly, returned to his regular life, let the whole thing become a story he told himself late at night about the time he'd stepped out of his own life for 3 weeks and felt briefly like a different person. He could have. He didn't. On a Thursday evening, 11 days after Claire had walked out of the lobby with her head high and her silence intact, Ethan sat at the kitchen island of his apartment and wrote a letter by hand. Not typed, not dictated, not reviewed by anyone. He used a pen that had belonged to his father, a heavy, old-fashioned thing that forced you to slow down, to commit to each word before moving to the next. He wrote 2 full pages and crossed out most of them. He started again. This version was shorter, Honest in a way that made him uncomfortable, which he took as a sign that he was finally getting it right. He didn't explain the investigation. She could find that information herself if she wanted it, and explaining it now would feel like justification. He didn't apologize in the sweeping, transactional way that powerful people apologized when they needed something resolved. He wrote about the Tuesday morning when she fixed the printer without anyone asking, about the lunch where she talked about her father, and he'd felt for the first time in years like a conversation was asking something real of him. About the Friday night in the dim office, the corrupted file, the moment her laugh had filled the empty floor, and he'd understood that what he felt wasn't curiosity anymore. He wrote, "I don't expect this to change anything. I'm not sending it to reopen a door. I'm sending it because you deserve to know what was real," and all of it was except the name on the badge. He folded the letter, put it in an envelope. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out the plastic badge, Ethan Cole, temporary staff, and held it for a moment. It was a cheap, ordinary thing. Laminated paper, a clip on the back, the kind of object that gets thrown away without thought. He put it in the envelope with the letter. He drove to her building himself. No driver. He found the address through channels he was aware were borderline, acknowledged that to himself, and decided it was the last time he would use that kind of access for something personal. He left the envelope with the night attendant at the front desk, gave no name, and walked back to his car in the cold. He sat behind the wheel for a while without starting the engine. The city hummed around him. Headlights, distant sirens, the particular energy of Chicago after dark. He thought about Claire in her apartment, maybe reading, maybe not, maybe already asleep, maybe looking at her phone at a message from someone who wasn't him. He started the car. He didn't know if she would open it. He didn't know if it mattered. What he knew, what sat in his chest with the quiet certainty of something finally true, was that he had done the only thing left that was honest. Everything else was hers to decide. She came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the lobby, 4 days after the letter. Ethan was in a meeting when his assistant knocked, which she never did during meetings, and leaned in with the careful expression of someone delivering information they weren't sure how to categorize. "There's a woman downstairs," she said quietly. "She says she doesn't have an appointment. She said to tell you she's here to finish a conversation." He was out of his chair before she finished the sentence. Claire was standing in the lobby when the elevator opened, not sitting, not pacing, just standing with her bag over one shoulder and her eyes on the entrance doors, like she was still deciding whether she'd made the right call coming here. She was wearing a dark wool coat he hadn't seen before, her hair down for once, and she looked exactly like herself, which was to say, completely unintimidated by 42 floors of glass and steel and the name Mercer etched in the wall behind the reception desk. She turned when she heard him. For a moment neither of them spoke. The lobby moved around them, a courier at the desk, 2 men in suits crossing toward the elevators, the soft percussion of the revolving door. All of it felt very far away. "I read the letter," she said. "I know," he said. Then, because it was true, "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." She looked at him steadily. "I stood at my kitchen counter with it for a long time before I opened it. I'm glad you did. I haven't decided yet whether I am." It wasn't cruel. It was honest, which was something else entirely, and he respected it more than any easier answer would have deserved. He nodded toward the door. "There's a coffee place on the corner," he said. "No conference rooms, no assistants." He paused. "Just a corner table, if you want it." She considered him for a moment. "Okay," she said. They walked out together into the pale November afternoon, the kind of cold that sharpens everything. The smell of the city, the edges of buildings against the sky, the sound of their own footsteps on the sidewalk. The cafe was small and warm, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and music, low enough that you could actually hear the person across from you. They ordered without fuss, sat down, and for the first time since any of this began, there was no badge between them, no cover story, no careful distance maintained under the guise of professionalism. "I need to say something before anything else," Claire said, wrapping both hands around her cup. "It wasn't the position that hurt me. I don't care that you're a CEO. I grew up watching my father hold doors open for people like you, and he was 10 times the man most of them were." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "What hurt," she continued, "was that you looked at me every day and chose the lie over and over, not once, not by accident. Every single morning you put that badge on." She paused. "I let you in. I don't do that easily, and you were someone else the entire time." The words landed exactly as they were meant to. He didn't deflect them. "You're right," he said, "all of it. There's no version of this where the reason justifies what it cost you." She looked at him, really looked, the way she had on that first day when she glanced up from her screen and given him a single nod. Only this time she held it longer, reading something in his face with the same quiet attention she applied to everything. "The letter," she said finally. "The thing you wrote about the printer, the lunch, the Friday night." She stopped. Was that real? Every word. She nodded slowly. Outside the window, the city moved at its usual indifferent pace. Somewhere behind them, someone laughed at another table. The music shifted to something softer. "I'm not forgiving you today," she said. "I want you to know that clearly." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm also not walking away." She met his eyes. "I'm asking for something I've never asked anyone for." "What's that?" "A real beginning." Her voice was steady. "No roles, no performance, just who you actually are and who I actually am, and we see if that's something." Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the specific release of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 weeks and had finally, cautiously, been given permission to breathe. He reached across the table, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back. She didn't. His hand covered hers, warm, still, certain in the way that only honest things can be certain. "A real beginning," he said. And for the first time since he'd walked onto that logistics floor wearing someone else's name, Ethan felt like himself, completely and without apology. Some love stories begin with a spark. This one began with a lie, and survived it anyway because what grew underneath was too honest to be buried. Ethan didn't fall for who he pretended to be. He fell for who Claire made him remember he was. And she didn't choose the CEO. She chose the man who showed up at her door with nothing but the truth and a worn plastic badge. Sometimes the realest things begin the moment the disguise finally comes off. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Every single one of you keeps these stories alive. And if you want more, deeper, more intense, without interruptions, the link to my app is in the first pinned comment. Inside, there's a new story waiting for you every day. You won't want to miss it.